This is part 85 of C# tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss a simple real-time example where a stack collection class can be used. We discussed the basics of stack collection class in part 83 of this video tutorial, so please watch part 83 before proceeding. These are the two common scenarios that I can think of where a stack class can be used: implementing undo functionality in an application and implementing browser back button. Let's say for some reason we don't want to use the back button that is provided by a browser. Instead, we want to have a custom back button within our ASP.NET web application. Let's see how to implement that using a stack class. Let's flip to Visual Studio. So here I have a blank ASP.NET web application. First of all, let me add a class file to this project, and let's call it basepage.cs. And I'm going to make this class inherit from system.web.ui.page. And in a bit you'll understand why we are doing that. Okay, now as this class is inheriting from system.web.ui.page class, the page class has onload event. So I'm going to override the onload event handler. So override onload. Okay, so what do I want to do within this onload event? Now, in a bit, we are going to make this base page class the base class for all of our web forms within our application. Okay, so before the page load event of the respective web form is invoked, since this is the base class for all of the web forms, the onload event of this base page will be executed. Okay, and here we are going to write the logic to create a stack and then add the history of the URLs that the user has visited to that stack. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a stack. So URLs are strings, so I'm going to create a stack of strings, and maybe let's call this URL stack. And then I'm going to store this URL stack in a session variable. So session of, let's call this URL stack. Okay, and I want to do this only if session of URL stack is null. So if the stack is not present in the session, only then go ahead and create a new stack. Otherwise, do not create it if it's already there. Okay, so that's the first step. We created the URL stack. Now I'm going to write some code here. This may not make sense at the moment, but don't worry. Well, it will make much more sense in just a bit. So if request, so if there is a request for a web form, if the request URL referrer is not null. Okay, what does this condition mean? If it doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to talk about that in just a bit. And if this dot page dot is post back, so if it's not a post back request, and session of back button clicked equal to null. Okay, if these three conditions, if we have met these three conditions, then what we basically want to do is pull out the URL stack that is present in the session variable and then add the URL referrer to that stack. Okay, let me write that code and then I'll explain that. So from the session, pull the stack, and the stack that is present in the session is of type string, and let's call it URL stack, and let's make a copy of this. Okay, so we pulled the URL stack that is present in the session variable. Now what I want to do is I want to push the URL referrer absolute URI into the stack. Okay, now what is this URL referrer? If that doesn't make sense, let me explain. Let's say, for example, in my application we have 4 web forms. Now let's say I am on web form 1, and then once I click on web form 2, so we will be navigated to web form 2. The URL referrer for web form 2 is web form 1, because we came to web form 2 from web form 1. Similarly, from web form 2, if I click the link on web form 3, then the URL referrer for web form 3 is web form 2. Okay, so at the moment, let's say I am on web form 3, and then if I click this web form 4 link that is present on web form 3, we will be navigated to web form 4. So the URL referrer for web form 4 is web form 3. Okay, so basically what we are saying here is, if the URL referrer is not equal to null, and if it's not a post to back request, and then if the back button is not clicked, in that case, get the absolute URI of the URL referrer. Absolute URI means, we are going to get everything starting from http:// to the entire URL basically. Okay, and push that into this stack. In a bit we will see how we are going to use this stack to implement the back functionality within our application. Okay, and then I'm going to write one more condition here. So if the session of back button clicked not equal to null, then let's set session of back button clicked to null. Okay, now there are quite a bit of moving pieces here. If this code doesn't make much sense at the moment, don't worry, it's going to be much clearer in just a bit. Okay, so this is the base page. Okay, now next I'm going to add a master page for our application. Now master page will give a consistent look and feel for all our web forms in the entire application. We will discuss master pages in a later video session, but let me go ahead and add a master page to this application. So let's add a new item, and let me select master page, and let's call this site.master. Okay, so we have a master page here. Now I want to design a master page that looks like this. So first of all, I need a table. So let me go ahead and include a table within, let's get rid of that div tag, and then let's use a table here, and let's use the style attribute and set first of all border to 1 pixel solid black, and then I'm going to hard code the width to 500 pixels, and then I'm also going to set font family to Arial. Alright, so let's close the table, and within the table I'm going to have a tr and then a td, and for this td I'm going to set call span to 2, and here I'm going to use a label control. We will see in just a bit how we are going to use this label. Let's call this LBL message, and let's get rid of this text right there, and let's set the fore color of this label to red. Okay, so we have a label control there, and then let's use another tr, and then first td, for the first td within that tr I'm going to use the style attribute, and then set the width of this td to 100 pixels. Let's close that td, and within this td I'm going to have these links. I'm going to do this in the master page so that every content page that has subscribed to the master page will have all these links. Otherwise we'll have to repeat these links on each and every content page. So that's the reason why we are including them in the master page. So within this td here I'm going to have another table, and let's use a tr, and then I'm going to have a td here. Let's actually make a copy of this one. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so in the first td of the first tr we need this text which says links. So whatever you can see here, and then we want these links. So I'm going to have an anchor tag here. So anchor tag href equals, I'm going to have the complete URL starting from HTTP. So HTTP localhost /, and if you look at the name of our web project, it is web forms demo. So let me copy the name of the project. So localhost web forms demo / let's say web form 1.aspx, and then let's give it some text which says like webform 1. Okay, so let me copy this and then paste it in the other TDs. So this is going to be webform 2, and the text says webform 2, and let's do that for webform 3 and webform 4. So this is going to be webform 3 and webform 3, and finally webform 4, and this one is going to be webform 4. Alright, so we have designed this TD which contains these links. Next, I want the content placeholder where each content page can plug in their specific content, and then I need a back button. Again, we need back button on each and every web form, so I'm going to include that back button within the master page. So I'm going to have another TD here, and then within this TD I'm going to have a back button. So let me drag and drop a button. Maybe let's change the ID of the button to btn back, and let's set the text on this to back. Okay, and then along with the back button we need the content placeholder. Okay, so I'm going to take this content placeholder. So basically this is the location where each content page will plug in their page specific content. Okay, so at this point we should have a master page that looks like this. Okay, so let's actually flip that to the design mode and you can see it. Okay, so this is where the content, the content page specific content will be plugged in. So let me double click this button to generate the event handler. Okay, so when I click the back button on the master page, what should happen? That's what we are going to write here. So obviously, if I have navigated, let's say for example from webform 1 to webform 2, and from there to webform 3, and from there to webform 4, and then once I am on webform 4, if I click the back button, I should be navigating to webform 3, and then if I click the back button, I should go back to webform 2, and then subsequently to webform 1. Okay, so let's write that code. Okay, so if basically when I click this back button, what I'm going to do here is, if you remember, in the master page, in the base page, we have the session of back button clicked. So when I click the back button, I'm going to set this to yes. So session of back button clicked is yes. Okay, meaning we have clicked the back button. And then what I'm going to do here is, what's the name of our stack? It's URL stack within the session variable. So if session of URL stack, if that is not equal to null, that means there is something within the session. So in that case, what do we want to do? We want to retrieve that URL stack out of the session variable and then pick the first URL and redirect the user to that URL. Okay, so URL is of type string. So string URL is equal to, we need to retrieve that from the stack that is present in that session variable. First of all, we need to pull it out from the session variable. So I'm going to copy this. So stack of string, let's call it URL stack, equals that, and we need to typecast that to be whatever we are retrieving out of session. It comes out as an object, so we need to typecast it to be of this type, stack of string. And then we're going to use the pop method to retrieve the item that is present at the top of the stack. So we are going to get the recent most URL that the end user has visited. Okay, and then what we are going to do, we are going to redirect the user to that URL, response.redirect to that URL. Okay, now another thing that I'm going to do here, so once we get this URL stack, I'm going to check if URL stack.count is greater than 0. Okay, meaning there are some URLs that user has visited, so it's okay to pull the most recent URL from the stack and then redirect the user to that URL. But then if the count is 0, if you invoke pop method, what's going to happen? It's going to throw an exception, and we don't want that to happen. And again, if the count is 0, we know that there are no pages in the history, and we want to display a status message to the user stating there are no pages in the history. So in that case, what I'm going to do, and if you remember, in the master page, in the first tier, we have this label, and the ID of the label is LBL message. So what I'm going to do here is set the text of that label to there are no pages in the history, or you can give any meaningful message that you want. Okay, so at this point we have implemented our base page, we have implemented our master page. Now the next step is to add content pages. Let's go ahead and add 4 content pages. So right click on the master page, add content page, and by default we are going to get the name as webform1.aspx. And then what I'm going to do here is on the ASPX page itself, I'm going to include an h1 and just say this is webform1. Okay, and in the code behind file, look at this. By default, every web form is going to inherit from system.web.ui.page. Okay, but we don't want our web forms in our application to be inheriting from that page. Instead, we want, look at this, this is the base class. System.web.ui.page is the base class for every web form, but I'm going to make this inherit from base page class. And if you look at our base page class, that is inheriting from system.web.ui.page. So in between we have introduced this base page class because we want to override the onload event, and we want to include our custom logic here to add the URLs that the user has visited to a stack, so that we can implement the back functionality, back button functionality. Alright, so let's repeat this step to add webform 2, 3 and 4. So let me right click on the master page, add a content page, and that's going to add webform 2, and here let me actually copy this and paste that on webform 2, and let's call it this is webform 2 so that we know on which web form we are. And then within the code behind file, I'm going to make this webform 2 inherit from base page. So let's do that for webform 3. So add content page, so that's going to be webform 3, and here we're going to say this is webform 3, and within the code behind file, webform 3 is going to inherit from base page class. And finally, let's add webform 4. So let's change the text to this is webform 4, and within the code behind file, let's make this inherit from base page. Alright, so all is in place now. So let's go to our base page, put a breakpoint there and see how it actually works. And similarly, let's go to our master page, and within the code behind file of the master page, let's put a breakpoint in this button back click event handler. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. So I am on webform 1, so by default we should land on webform 1, but then since we have breakpoints here, before the webform 1 page load event has executed, it's going to invoke the base page load event. And look at this, this is the first time we are landing on this application. So if I step through by pressing F10, session of URL stack will be null. So when I press F2, it gets inside, it creates a new URL stack, and it's going to store that in the session variable. Okay, and then when I press F10, so URL referrer here is going to be null. Why? Because we directly came to this URL. We didn't come from any other page. So that's why here URL referrer is null and it's not a post back. Okay, so since URL referrer is null, it's not going to come inside this condition. So when I press F10, again it's going to come here, session of back button clicked. We didn't click the back button, so it's not going to go inside. So when I press F5, what's going to happen? We will land on web form 1. Okay, now I am on web form 1. Look at the URL. I am on web form 1. When I click this link, web form 2, look at what's going to happen. The onload event will get executed again, and then session of URL stack, is this equal to null? No, we have already created a stack and put that into the session variable, so this condition is false, so it will not go inside that, and it will come here. And check this URL referrer. Look at the URL referrer. What is that? It's webform1.aspx. So webform1 is referring us to webform2. And is this a post back? False. And we have not condition here, false, and false is true, and we didn't click back button, so this will be null. So it's going to come inside this block, and look at what's happening here. We're retrieving that URL stack out of the session, and at the moment in URL stack, how many items we have? 0 items. There's nothing in the URL stack. Now when I say push, look at this, request.url referrer, that is the URL referrer. And what is the absolute URI? The full URL. Okay, so that URL now will be pushed into the stack. So once I press F10, and if you look at this URL stack, there's going to be one item, and that is webform1 URL. Okay, so when I press F10, we didn't click the back button, so it will be null, so it will not go inside. F5. Now let me click on webform3. Now what's going to happen? The same thing. So if I come here, if you look at the URL stack, already we have webform1.aspx. Now we came to webform3, but from where did we come? From webform2. So the URL referrer is webform2. So we're going to push that into the stack. So when I press F10, and then if you look at this URL stack, look at that, webform2 is on top of webform1. So let me press F5 here, and then let's go to webform4. Okay, so same idea. Let's press F10, come to the URL stack here. So within the URL stack, we already have webform1, webform2. Now we are on webform4, and to webform4 we came from webform3. So here URL referrer is going to be webform3, and that will be pushed into the stack. So F10, and if you look at this URL stack, we're going to have webform3 there. Okay, so let me press F5, and we are on webform4. Now when I click back button, what's going to happen? Let's look at that. So I click the back button. So when I am on webform4 and when I click on back button, to which web form should we navigate to? We should go back to webform3. Okay, so we should go back to the recent item within the history. So that's why we need to pull the item that we have added last to the stack. Okay, so that's why we are using stack here. So when I click back button, look at that, the onload event is executed. So if session of URL stack, it's not null, so it's not going to go inside. URL referrer, it's not going to be null. Okay, but then is this a post back? True. So we are saying if not is post back, only then come inside. So it's not going to come here inside this block. And when I press F10 and session of back button clicked, we clicked the back button now, but that event hasn't been executed yet, because page load event will be fired even before the post back event. Okay, so when I press F10, session of back button clicked will still be null, and because of that it's not going to go inside. Now when I press F5, it's going to go to that back button click event handler within our master page. And then look at this, we are setting that session variable back button clicked to yes. So F10, and session of URL stack, is it null? No. So it's going to go inside, retrieve the URL stack from the session, and URL stack.count is definitely greater than 0. And then look at this URL stack. What is the item that is present on top of the stack? Webform3. And when we use pop method, it's going to retrieve the item that is present at the beginning of the stack, which is nothing but webform3. So when I press F10, it's going to come here, retrieve the top URL from the stack, which is web form 3, and we are going to redirect the user to that web form. And when we do a redirection, what's going to happen? The page load event of web form 3 is going to be fired again. Okay, so let me press F5. Look at that. It is going to come to the onload event again. Now I press F10, session of URL stack. It is not null, so it's not going to go there. And then URL referrer is web form 4, but then this is not a post back request, so it's going to be false. So these two conditions are true, but this condition is false because we have clicked session, back button. So session of back button clicked will not be equal to null. Okay, look at that, session of back button clicked. If I take this and then go into the immediate window, look at that, we have S in there. So it's not going to go inside, but here, since it is not equal to null, it's going to come here and set that to null. And now when I press F5, what should happen? We should land on web form 3. Okay, so let me disable all the breakpoints here. And now when I click back button from web form 3, where should we go? To web form 2. Look at that. And from there we should go to web form 1. Look at the URL as well. And now at this point all the items would have been removed from the stack. So when I click back here, what's going to happen? There are no pages in the history. So we get the output that we expect. Alright. So this is a very simple example of using stack class to implement our custom back button within an ASP.NET web application. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.